HTML5 validators. So let's look at our album details page for a minute. Right? So we added this required attribute. Does this use JavaScript? If I disable JavaScript in my browser, will that HTML5 required attribute still run, or will JavaScript disable it? Yeah, so it will still run. So the HTML5 validations, they don't actually depend on JavaScript, which is good. So that means they do run. Okay. But why, he explained, even if the user has JavaScript enabled and or we're using HTML5, how is it still possible? Why do we need server-side validation? How could somebody still send a request to this page and get around our client-side validation and give us either blank data or bad data? That would be one option. Use a device that HTML5 isn't supported, which some people still do, right? Because many big, sorry? Yeah, many people never update. You know, they're afraid to update their software, or they work for a company where the users aren't allowed to update it. Only the IT department can update it. So they may have a very old browser that doesn't run HTML5. How else? What else? He did it in the video. What did he do in the video to send a request straight to the server without going through the front-end form that he designed? How did he, yes, how did he do it, Makita?
Well, he intercepted it with this little program that he had.
He did it with this. There's a tool I highly recommend everybody install on their computers. It's very useful, called Fiddler. So with Fiddler, this allows us to make an HTTP request to another URL. So as long as someone has the address of our save page, they can either build their own form and post to our page, or they could even send a request right through Fiddler. So they could send a request to our data, which will go to our page. And then if they're not using our form, if we're not checking on the server as well, we're allowing them to send us whatever data they want. And we're going to try saving it to our database, which is very dangerous. So as he said in the video, we use HTML5 and client-side validation for giving our users a good experience, but we also need server-side validation at the same time for extra security, because the client-side validation is not foolproof. Someone uses an old browser, disables JavaScript, or sends requests directly to our save pages. We haven't checked what they're saving. So just before we do this, there's a little file here, a little Word file here on Blackboard that says Lesson 4 Class Notes. I want you to click on that and open up just a little Word document. So open this up. So I've given you this little chart, and I've given you two variables. A variable called small number with a value of 50, and a variable called big number with a value of 400. So I want you to decide if we had an if statement with these two variables in that operator, would it evaluate to true or false? So if, for example, small number equals big number. Is this one going to evaluate to true or false? So that one's going to evaluate to false, right? What does the, and you need to shift these around. So the definitions don't match the operators. What does this operator mean? So that's equal to. So I'm going to drag this one in here. So where does this one go? Greater one goes down. Okay. and we said that's false. So I want you to take a couple minutes, fill out the rest of the chart on your own in Word. So match the operator with the definition, and then following this example, apply that operator to our small and big and decide if it would evaluate to true or false. So we've done the first one together, do the other three. Right, so this value represents 50, that represents 400. So if we had an if statement with that operator, would it be true or false for each of the four operators, right? The first case, it's false because those numbers are not equal.
In every case, it's going small first and then big second.
Yeah, so we'll just repeat this in each case. We'll take out the operator. You know, you'll just supply the operator in this case, right? So will that be true or false? So move the definitions around so they're on the right line, and then decide if each one's true or false, with 50 and 400 as our numbers. Done. So Mike, I'm going to ask you for the second one. We've got greater than. So would this one evaluate to true or false with that operator? Right. Right. Because our small number is 50, our big number is 400. Obviously, that's not greater
I
than.
did it in another way. I did big number greater than small number.
Then it would be true, right? Okay. What about this one? So this.
So it should be less than or.
Okay. Yep. So obviously, the last definition must be not equals. So what is this one going to evaluate to?
True for me, it was false.
Okay, but you reversed them, right? So I had small number, big number. So that one's true. Krupa, what about the last one? Will that be true or false? Right, so that one's also true. So these operators, they're not new for you. If you're in programmer, well, you've used these operators with Java, same operators. If you're in web, well, we use them with C# in fundamentals. So it shouldn't be anything too new for us. So what we want to do now is we want to take our save album page. We're going to disable temporarily. We're going to disable the HTML5 validation on our form, and we're going to write the PHP code to also check on the server. Okay. And I'll use Fiddler. You don't need Fiddler, but I'll use Fiddler on mine just so you can see what happens. I'll recreate what he did, and I'll send a request to my save page with no validation, and we'll see what happens when I do that. Okay. So if you want to, if you can go into your wherever you're storing your files for the class, we've got our lesson 3 folder from last week. So all I'm going to do is copy it and then rename that folder to lesson 4. We'll work with all the files we had working last week. Okay, and we'll keep doing this every week as we're building out this site. We'll keep adding on to it. So I'll copy my lesson 3. I'll paste it. I'll call it lesson 4. And then I'm going to open up my lesson 4 folder with PHP Storm so we can modify some of the code here. So I can load the same page now from my lesson 4 folder. It's identical to.
Sorry, are we modifying album details or save album?
We're going to modify both. So I'm going to show you what happens. So right now I can't save a blank album because we've got HTML5 validation here. We've got the required attribute. So here's my album details page. So this required attribute, that's what prevents me from submitting that as a blank form. So as long as a user goes to my album details page, they're not going to be able to put in blanks and save, right? It prevents them. But here's where here's how someone could submit without loading this page. So somebody goes to this page and sees that my save URL is called save album. So now I take a tool like Fiddler and I'm going to compose a request. So I'm going to make a post request to my save page. I'm sending a blank request, so I'm not giving any values. So there's no title, there's no year, there's no artist. If I try and execute this, and now I go and look in my database, I probably now have a blank album in there. Because a tool like this lets us make requests to any URL. And we could do a get or we could do a post. So let me log in and check my database. Here's my local database. So my concern, without any PHP validation on our save page, okay, you know what? We didn't actually get a blank, and that's because we said the title was required in my database. So we're fortunate that we also added the validation in the database. It prevented it. However, if I just supply a title and leave the rest out, it's going to allow me to save. So here's what we're going to do. For now, let's temporarily take out the HTML5 validation. So we're going to take it out. We'll put it back in later, because ideally we want to validate both with HTML5 on the client as well as with PHP on our save page. We want both. And then we'll come back. We'll add a few other things to this page a bit later. So on my save page, now we want to open up the save page. So right now we're grabbing, if I fill it out now I should be able to save it. This will save a blank record. So we've disabled the HTML5 validation. And now if I save, now it tells me my album was saved. And now we've got a blank here. So we should be adding some PHP code on our save page to make sure that we have all the values we want before we do an insert. And if not, we want to show message to the user telling them what they've left out or done wrong. So before we ever do any of this code, before we bother connecting to the database, writing and executing our SQL, we want to check these values. So we need to check each value individually. Now we're going to validate the inputs. And if any one of the inputs is not valid, we want to display a descriptive message to the user, and we don't want to do any of this stuff. So how can we check? There are a couple of functions we could use in PHP. We want to make sure that the title has a value. We should make sure the artist has a value as well. The year could be empty. Although if the year isn't empty, we want to make sure we have a number. Does anybody know there's a couple built-in functions in PHP that will tell us if a variable has a value or has no value? You can look it up. Google's your friend.
Sorry, what was the question again?
How can we check in PHP if a variable has any value? Okay, so easiest way is by using the function called empty. And empty takes one parameter. What variable do you want to evaluate for empty? So let's check title. So if title is empty, what should we do? Yeah, so what command are we going to use to display a message? So echo. We'll tell them that the title is required. And then we'll put on an HTML line break. Why would we want a line break after that message? Right, because maybe they've left out other stuff, so we can print all the messages. Okay. Now let's just see, we left on our validation for the year, I think. Yeah, okay, we set 1900 as the year, so that's okay. We can leave that one for now. What about the artist? What should we do with the artist?
There should be no number in artist name, so they should.
Well, there could be Blink 182, right? So, but what should we check for at least? Yeah, again, let's check that it's not empty either. So if they leave out title, it'll print titles required. If they leave out artist, it'll print artist is required. If they leave out both, we'll get both those messages. Now we could do this as one if statement, like an and or an or. Why is it a good idea to check each value separately? Like, why don't we just have one if statement that says, you know, if title is empty or artist is empty?
Well, then you're only able to display one message.
Yeah, because then we've just got one message. It's not clear. right? Because someone may have left out artist, someone may have left out title, someone else may have left out both. So by checking each value individually, we can provide the user a better description of what they've done wrong, which makes it likely they can fix all those errors in one try and submit the form, right? If they have to keep trying to submit over and over again, many users will get frustrated and they'll just leave our site. They won't continue to work with it. Okay. So right now, well, I'll try this out. So now I'll save mine. Title's blank, artist is blank. So I can see my two messages, which is good, but something else happened. What else happened after it showed me the two error messages? It's still saved, right? If I go and check my database, I now have two blanks. So our logic isn't quite complete here, right? We're showing the user the error, but then our code just keeps on executing, connect to the database and insert. So what should we do to prevent this? How can we know whether or not this code, all of this stuff, to do the saving and say a message that it's saved? We need another condition here, don't we?
Well, why don't we, for this time, why don't we check both conditions? Because we've already displayed a message. And then we can say if both one is empty and the other is empty, or if one or the other is empty, then don't run the code, otherwise run the code.
We could, but also we may start adding more things to our form, which then makes that logic more right? If we want to add more fields, then that's good. All the combinations of possible errors gets complicated. So that would work for now, but if we think about kind of the ability to scale it up, there may be a more efficient, there's another way that I think might be a little more efficient that we wouldn't have to change if we add more to our form. How else could we decide whether this block of code in blue should run or not?
Well, if the condition does false, I mean, like it is true that it is empty, we just do exit, stop PHP from executing.
We could, but if we do that, if they leave them both blank, if we exit here, they're never going to see that message until they fill it out again and get the message, and then let's go for the third time. So, great idea. Let's create a variable that will tell us basically what was called a flag variable, right? It'll be true or false. Either the form's complete or the form has errors. And then we can evaluate that variable and decide whether to connect or not. So let's create one more variable. We'll keep a really simple, descriptive, easy to type name. Let's call it OK. A variable to indicate if there are one or more input errors. So what should we make the default value of OK? True or false? Let's make it true. So at the beginning, there's no errors, right? We'll assume our inputs are good. So now if they leave the title out, what should we do with that variable? Yeah, so once we see an error, we'll toggle that variable and say our form's no longer valid. Now, if they enter a title, this code gets skipped, and when we get down here, OK will still be true, right? Because we haven't changed it from its initial value. What happens if they leave out artist? Again, we'll set OK to false. If they make one mistake or two mistakes, it doesn't matter. In both cases, we want to say our form is no longer OK. So now, Ernest, can you explain how can we use this variable with this block of code that connects and saves?
We can just create a condition
Right, so if okay, now we could say equals equals true, but because it's Boolean, we don't have to say that. So if okay is still true, meaning we have a title and we have an artist, then I want to move this closing curly brace all the way down here. So all of our code to connect and save to the database, this only happens if we didn't find any errors. So now we validated this on the server side as well. If someone uses a tool like Fiddler to try and send us a request, these rules will check those inputs. And they won't be able to save. So now if I go back and try this, I'll just refresh and submit my blank form again. Tells me title and artist were both left out. But now the real test is to look in the database and see whether it saved another album or not. Hopefully it didn't. Nope. So now my validation is working. So I'm going to check all of this. If I put in a title, no artist, it says artist is required. Good. If I go back and put in an artist and no title, tells me title's required. If I leave them both out, it shows me both. So now we're checking on the server as well as we were checking on our client. So now we can't get any inputs. We won't be saving blank data anymore, even if the user tries to go around our HTML5 validation in our form. So we probably want those required fields back in here, but with them working, we have no way to test our server-side validation. We needed to take them out here temporarily so that we could actually try to make this work. If we wanted to do something like a duplicate check, we'd also need here, before we did this, well, we'd still connect to the database, but we'd need to run a select query and see, for example, does that album title already exist? And if it does, we would display a message to the user, album already exists, and we wouldn't save. Okay. You don't need to do that for your assignment, but for assignment 1, I want to see both client-side validation with HTML5 as well as server-side validation with PHP. Your application should have both. Okay, for a good user experience with the client side and extra security on the server side. So the server-side validation is really not very complicated. We just need if statements to check that we're getting proper values. You know, we probably should check the year as well. We're checking it on the client, but that won't help if a user uses a tool like Fiddler. They could still send us a year of ABC. So maybe we should check the year for a number, and that number is greater than or equal to 1900. So I'm going to take this out as well, temporarily, on my form. Let's take out those HTML5 rules that type is number and minimum is 1900. So there's no validation on our form whatsoever anymore. Nothing to stop a user giving us all blank data. So how can we check here to make sure that the year is a number and that it's 1900 or greater? We're going to need some.
If condition.
Okay, yep. So we're going to have if something. And our error message should be something like, what should we do with okay? if we get an error with the year.
Make it false.
Yeah, again, we'll make it false. Now the year isn't required, so we're not going to check for empty. We just want to check that it's a number. If it's not empty, that it's a number, and that that number is greater than or equal to 1900. So what kind of conditions will we need here?
If that level was greater than 800.
Okay, so if year greater than,
Or equal.
so if it's greater than or equal to, actually, well, not if it's greater than, because that's what we're allowing.
Okay.
So it actually should be, if it's less than 1900, we want to stop the user and say, no, we're not accepting your album from the 14th century. Too old for our music store. So let's try this out. But then I also need to see what happens if we leave it blank, or if we put in a text value, which someone could do with a tool like Fiddler. So we'll try all of these possibilities and see how they work. So so if I put in 1899, I have a title, I have an artist. Okay, so that's good. What if I put in, see what happens here. Okay, good. What if we leave it blank? So this is a problem, right? Because we said the year might be unknown when we're first saving a new album. So we need to be able to let a user save a year value that's empty. Whereas when I leave it empty, it's still our validation rule saying, no, that's not, that value is not okay. So what we've got so far is good, but we need another condition in here.
I think before we check if the number is like less than 1900, we need to check if it's actually a number.
Right. So first, we can check if it's not empty. We don't need to check the numeric. And we'll indent that. So if year is empty, that's okay. We won't check. We're allowing them to put in a blank. But if it's not blank, well, then it has to be a number greater than or equal to 1900. So try that out and let's see if that fixes our problem. If we leave it blank, is it okay now? I hope so.
What if I put 1900.5?
Great question. How could we prevent that?
Checking if it's an integer.
We could check if it's an integer. That would be one option. What else could we do if you enter 1900.5? How could we just get rid of the 0.5 and keep the 1900 if we want? We could truncate it, or we could parse it as an integer, which would ignore the decimals. So what we could do So we could put in an else here. So year is not empty. It's not less than 1900, but yeah, that's a good point, Sir Brenda. We want to make sure there's a decimal. Otherwise, hang on. I'm drawing a blank. I haven't done this. I can't remember the function we need, but Google's my friend. I've been doing this for a while. There, int val. We'll take the year and we'll convert it to an integer. So it ignores the decimal part of it. So we've actually got 3 checks here. We'll just get rid of it. So let's try these combinations out and make sure we got this right. I realize it's 4 o'clock. We're actually going to wrap up pretty early today. This was pretty much the last thing I wanted to do. So we'll just finish. Okay. So let's try this. So now if I leave it blank, that's good. Blank is okay. It's going to allow that. However, we'll try what you're suggesting. Let's see if it catches it. Oh, okay. That didn't work too well. We may have to tweak that. Oh no, it did work. Actually, it's saved. Sorry, we just ignore the decimal and we take the year. So I'll delete some of those out of here. I don't really need them. So whatever validation rules we build, it really depends on what we're going to allow from our users on a particular form in a particular application. The rules for one page might be different from the rules on another page. So we have to think through the logic. We want to use HTML5 on the front end when we can, but we also want to make sure we're validating on the back end too. So I will put my validation back on my album details because I don't just want to rely on the server side. So I'll undo all my changes and put my form back how we had it. So we've got server-side validation with our PHP. We've got client-side validation with HTML5. So it should be impossible now for somebody to send us values that we don't want in our database. There's really no way for them to do this, which is what we want. Does anybody have any questions about how we're doing these validation checks? If we wanted to add those placeholders, we could also do that here. So we just add placeholder tag. And then the user will see that text in gray inside of the inputs on the form. So again, we're trying to make it as easy as possible for them to give us the kinds of information we want. Right? So they see those little placeholders. Always a good idea to use placeholders in our forms. So this should always be the question when we design a form. How do we make it as easy as possible for somebody to use this? It's easy for us to forget that most of the people that use our web applications, they're not as tech savvy as we are. Right? We know how to fill out a form without these prompts. Many people don't. You know, Makita, there's people killing trees using paper, right? So our responsibility is make it easy for people to use this stuff and give us the information we want. So I want to see both of these things in your assignment. Your form will have HTML5 validators. Probably a good idea to use placeholders to tell the users what it is you want from them. And your save page will also have PHP validation to make sure that all those same validation rules are enforced on the server end with your PHP. Okay. So today was kind of a short lesson, which is fine. So next week, what we are going to do is we're going to get into the other parts of the CRUD. So right now we can create an album, we can view the list of albums. Next week we want to be able to, we'll do delete first because delete's pretty simple. And then we'll do update last because update is the most involved. So we're going to take our list of albums next week. We're going to add delete links here so we can click the delete link. What should always happen when someone clicks delete?
Are you sure?
Yeah, we should idiot proof it, right? Because people click the wrong thing all the time, or they're on their phones, and like me, you got fat thumbs and you tap the wrong thing. Okay, so we never want to delete stuff without giving the user a chance to say, oops, nope, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So we're going to add a delete link. We'll write a little jQuery, add a little jQuery script to give the user a delete confirmation. We'll delete it, and then we'll reload the page, and that album's going to be gone. Then we're going to put an edit link here. What should happen when we click an edit link? Where are we going to take the user? Yeah, we're going to take them back to this page. Will the page look like this when it loads? Caitlin, what were we going to do with this page? And so I want to edit this album. So I'm going to click edit. It's going to take me here. What's the page going to look like? Yeah, it should have, we're going to query the database and we should populate all of the existing values. So then when we hit save, rather than inserting that album again, we want to update any of the values that have been changed. So that's what we're going to do kind of next week. So by the end of next week, we'll be able to create, read, update, delete. We'll be able to do all of them. We don't need to make any new pages. We can do it just with the 3 pages we already have. Our form, which right now is an add form, will also become an edit form. And our save will do both insert and update. And this page can do the delete, or we'll make one other hidden page for delete. Okay, so we'll have this all working this time next week. And you guys will have your assignments handed in by then. Okay, so that's it for today. I can stick around for a little bit if somebody needs help. If not, if you're all good and your stuff's caught up, I will push my stuff that we did today up to GitHub right now. Okay, so I saw hands 1, 2, 3.
I would like to talk to you after you're done. I've been done.